I got a new fidget ring, and I don't know if you can hear it, but it jingles. Good times. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some fantasy fall recommendations. In fall, you guys know that I am a fall girly. I love me some fall reads. I really, really am always gravitating towards things like mysteries, especially later fall for mysteries, and then books that involve witchcraft or witchy books in some way, and fantasy, or kind of the darker side of things. So this year fantasy has really kind of taken a lot over a lot of my reading. I did like a huge kick in the middle of the summer where I read a lot of fantasy romance books. And so while fantasy is what a lot of people I think gravitate towards in the fall, it's never something that I purposefully went out of my way to find. If fantasy was included in a story that I really wanted to read, awesome, but I never was like, ooh, I must read fantasy because it's fall. However, I've been reading a lot of fantasy this fall so far, so I wanted to walk you through just a handful. I've got 10 books here just to talk about as far as fantasy reads that I think are perfect for this fall season, especially if you are in like the spooky mood, or if you are someone who wants maybe something that's a little bit darker in the story and setting. So I will leave everything linked down below if you'd like to check out more of these books. I'll try not to go into too much about what they are about and just kind of talk about why I think they would work for this season. But I think that's as much as we need for the intro. So let's dive into the books. The first book is one that I read not too long ago, and that is The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. This is the first in a series. This is the only book that's out right now. The second one comes out sometime next year. I'm trying to remember exactly when it comes out. I want to say it comes out near the beginning of next year, maybe. So if you can kind of get on board with this before the rest of the series comes out. I think it's going to be a trilogy, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But this book is, I think, perfect for the fall because it involves witchcraft, specifically revolving around the dead, which is going to kind of be a theme, I think, for the spookier side of fall. So in this book, we follow our main character, Lore, who has this magical ability that is related to the dead in some way. And so she has lived in the catacombs her entire life. Well, maybe that's not true. She was born in the catacombs and has worked with a couple of drug lords, if you will, working through the drug trade in this city. And so at the beginning of the book, a sale goes wrong and she ends up getting caught by the king's people, and she's convinced that this is the end of, you know, the world for her. She's going to probably be killed by the king, but the king has other plans based on her specific skills that are demonstrated when she is the reason she gets captured. So due to her abilities, the king decides that he's going to use her and kind of puts her into the court life because he has some suspicions about some people in his court, and so he's using her and her abilities to, he's almost kind of blackmailing her in a way, as so like, if you don't work with me, then I'm going to send you off to prison, and it's like this super big bad prison that no one wants to go to. So she agrees to help him out, and so it's her, and she's working with this monk priest of sorts, but you've also got the prince who she is spying on. So there's a, I wouldn't say love triangle, but there's some stuff going on between the three of them. So because of, like I said, her magic, it's all about the dead. It relates to almost like reanimating the dead a little bit, so it has like that vibe to it. It's very, very spooky, again, because she's working in the catacombs. It does have that vibe as well, so it is a little bit of a darker fantasy story, especially when it comes to the magic side of it, which is why I think it would be perfect for the fall if you are someone who is more into the darker fantasy. There's nothing like, none of these are I would consider to be horror or scary in any way. This is just definitely because of the subject matters and the magic system. It's on the darker side. Another one that is similar to that I'm going to go ahead and say now because it's the only one on this list that I don't actually own, and it's actually a trilogy, and that is the Hades Trials trilogy. I can't remember exactly who this is by. It's by a couple of people. I believe one of them's name is Rose Wilson, but I'll leave it linked here. Like I said, this is a trilogy. I read this one in June of this year, and it's a series that I read so quickly. So I went into the first one. It was part of my recommendation series that I've been doing this year, and I just expected to read the first one, but the way that the series works is it's very much a cliffhanger ending. So it's like one giant story that's literally just been cut into 3 separate sections, rather than each book in the series having like its own arc and like the overarching series arc. So this is definitely one that you were going to want to have the other 2 on hand, but it is a kind of reimagining, if you will, of Hades and Persephone. In a sense, we've got Persephone, who at the beginning of the book gets kidnapped and taken to be part of the Hades trials, and basically whoever wins this trial will become queen of the underworld. And so he brings Persephone to partake in this. The problem is that there is a history between Hades and Persephone, but Hades remembers it and Persephone does not. So and then a lot of other people involved, a lot of other gods and goddesses remember Persephone as well, but not to the extent that Zeus and Hades remember her. So and then of course Persephone doesn't remember anything, so she's kind of thrown into this world. So it takes place almost entirely in the underworld. At the very, very beginning doesn't, because obviously she's in the human world and then kidnapped into the underworld. So that part's not, but the rest of this series, the rest of this story is in the underworld, and the underworld is this very dark, barren place. So because of that, it gives off those like darker vibes. It definitely has the whole like it being the underworld, Hades is the god of death, like that kind of thing is definitely more of the spooky vibe if you were wanting a kind of fantasy romance story. This is a good story if you just want something fun and something that's not going to, you're not gonna have to think too hard about, because it's not like the best written story of all time, but it is definitely an addictive story, and I really liked the romance between them. It is a little bit of a slow burn, I will say, because I feel like the first story had ended and like we really didn't get as much in the romance section as I thought we were going to. So it definitely dives a little bit into the darker stuff, but I think it's just because of the world and it being the underworld and Hades being the god of the dead. It has that reign to it as well. But yeah, it's just that fun fantasy romance vibe to it that I think is kind of perfect for this time of year. Another one is The Lord of Eternal Night by Ben Alderson. This is the first in this series. It's called the Darkmoor series. I have the first 3, I think, and I think there's a 4th one that I can't remember if it's actually out yet or not. But basically the idea behind this series is they are all reimaginings of a fairy tale. This one is Beauty and the Beast, and they're all reimagining in some way of a fairy tale or a Greek myth or something like that. And it just happens to take place in the same world. They don't really have to do with each other. Like, it's just the same universe. This one, if you couldn't tell by this, it's vampires. It's Beauty and the Beast, but we have a witch and a vampire. And so this book follows Marius and Jack. And so Jack is born with the power. One of the creatures from this coven is sent to this dark lord every year or so or something like that, and so they send Jack this time hoping that because he's got magical powers he will break this curse and lift his other coven members, like they'll be able to do magic again, but also rid themselves of this terrible monster person who was Marius. And obviously Marius is a vampire of sorts, and so it's a male-male romance between the 2 of them. I feel like it's really clear what this one is, but it's vampires. Like, the fact that this is a vampire story, vampires to me just screams Halloween. I just feel like this is a good one to go with. It's also a good one. It's the very first one I ever read by this author. Actually, I think to this date, it's the only one I've ever read by this author, because I keep collecting his books and not reading them. So far, only this one, but it was really, really good. I really liked their story. The world building is fascinating. It does take place, I think, in some of the colder months, so you have those elements as well, but it's this vampire type monster living in this giant house and not, I don't know, like entertaining, and it's just super dark and creepy and like dusty, and there's not a lot of people in this house because it's just the 2 of them. Also, I feel like there's a ghost in this book, if I remember correctly. So you've got that spooky element. So there's a lot of elements to this that would be considered spooky, but it's got witches and it's got vampires. It feels like fall. All right, the next one is representative of this entire series, because I have read this entire trilogy, and that is Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco. Did you think I was going to do this list without mentioning this? you would be wrong. So this series, especially the later books in the series, I think are more in the fall vein just because of the setting that it takes place in. But this world, all three of them, because it involves witches and princes of hell, and it's got witchcraft, and the witchcraft in this world is more about rituals and using grimoires and things of that nature. So it's definitely on the darker side of the magic system. But in this world, which I've explained to you so many times, and honestly, if you guys have not read this yet, you really need to. It's a trilogy. I read all three of them in pretty quick succession. I feel like I read the first two back to back, and then the third one I ended up reading like very shortly afterwards. But in this book, we've got Amelia, who, like I mentioned, is a witch. She comes from a family of witches, and in the kind of town that she's living in a like Italian-inspired town, and there have been a bunch of ridiculously brutal murders, and everyone who has been murdered has been a witch. And the book really gets started when her twin sister Victoria is murdered in a very similar way to all of these brutal murders, and so she kind of goes down the rabbit hole to try to figure out what happened to her sister and see if she can solve this serial killer kind of situation. And then she ends up summoning Wrath, who is one of the 7 princes of hell, and he ends up helping her because he's got like his own reasons as to why he needs to figure this out. But it's the two of them trying to figure out what happened to his sister, and it's all of these like spooky backwater dark alleyway kind of situations. And like I said, the second 2 books, the setting changes, so I don't want to tell you what it is because I think it's a huge spoiler, but the setting does change, which makes it even darker and gloomier. Especially the second one, I feel like we take place in the winter because I feel like there's a lot of snow going on, so it does have that darker, colder atmosphere. But it's, I don't know, there's just something about this that's just, it's so good, and I just want everyone to read it. I cannot wait to get to the newest book by this author, which is set in the same world. I haven't picked it up quite yet, but I love the series. The next one is another kind of replacement for the entire series, but mostly the first one, I think, because of the setting, and that is the Fortuna Sworn series by KJ Sutton, which is a series that you guys know I love. I've read the first 3 in the series. There are 4 out right now. In this book, we follow our main character, Fortuna Sworn, who is a nightmare, and she is one of the last nightmares. It's her and her brother who have this ability, and basically what that means is that she touches someone and then she immediately knows their biggest fear and can use it against them. So this book starts, it's been 2 years since her brother has gone missing. Everyone else has given up hope and assumes that he's dead. She has not, and so at the beginning of the book, she is being approached by a fairy who says that he knows what happened to her brother, will take her to him, help her figure out some stuff with her brother, but in order to do that, she has to marry him. So she agrees, they get married, and the plot starts from there. So it takes place in, I can't ever remember if it's the Seelie or Unseelie court, but I mean, because both Seelie and Unseelie fairies are involved in this world in some way, so I just can never remember which one is which. But one of them, she spends this entire book is mostly in that court, and so it is very dark. It's very, you know, underground. It gives me kind of the same vibes as the Hades Trials does, because it's definitely like that underground, underworld, dead vibe to it because of the just types of people that these fairies are. So it definitely expands from just that. In some of the later novels, you get a wider range of mythical creatures. By the end, we've got, I mean, so far we've been introduced to not only fairies, we have werewolves, we have witches, we have angels, we have vampires, we have dragons, but not in the way that you're thinking. And then we also have, I don't know what you would call them, the undead, I guess, but like there's a couple of creatures that kind of become like zombie-esque things. We have demons at one point. So like there's everything in this book. And so this one just kind of starts that story. But again, it's the setting, it's the whole, it's just described as very cold and dark and dank. And so that just gives me that fall vibe. Plus, it's a great series and you should read it. Another one that is perfect for the fall, in my opinion, is A Daughter of the Trolls, which is by Mackenzie Catron. The second book in this series actually comes out in November, which I'm hoping to get to because I do have the arc of it. And so I really, really need to get to that one. But this one takes place primarily, these 2 friends are going through the woods, is basically the best way to describe it. They're going on an adventure through the woods, and the woods, to me, scream fall. I don't know what it is about woods, but there's just something about going through the woods that screams that fall vibe to me. So this book follows our main character Sparrow, who is 18. So I was trying to remember exactly how old she is. She's 18, and she's always lived in this glade, which is a collection of a bunch of different magical, mythical creatures. She is specifically like, there's trolls, there's sprites, there's gnomes, imps, fairies, things like that. And so something bad happens, and her mother ends up getting kidnapped by this big bad witch boogeyman type woman. Ends up going on this adventure with her half goblin friend Rush to figure out kind of what happened and to get their families back. The thing is that Sparrow has a heart condition which keeps her in a wheelchair, and so she has to travel through the woods in a wheelchair. And so the author herself has a very, very similar situation to our main character. So this was a very interesting story about having that kind of disability representation and what that would mean for traveling through the woods, and how our characters can do that, and some conversations that they have to have between each other about certain things. So it was very well done, but it was again that like traveling through the woods. It does have some spookier elements to it, especially the big bad like villain of the story, which is called the Black Annis, and she is legitimately terrifying. So a little bit, I wouldn't say that this is horror by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some horror elements when it comes to her specifically, and just some of the other creatures who are considered like evil in this world. So it definitely has some darker elements to it. So this is on the darker side, but I loved it. It's a beautiful YA fantasy that I just cannot get enough of, and I love her writing. So lots to look forward to, especially with the second one coming out, which is a companion. It's not like a direct continuation of the story, but it still has that fun vibe to it. Another one is one that is on this list because it has to do with witches. So, can we guess what it is? It's Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. Y'all know I loved this book. It was so good. I could not stop talking about it. I haven't made time for the second one quite yet, but I so want to get to it because there's a cliffhanger. There's a cliffhanger at the end of this, and I have questions. So this one is a little bit more heavy-handed, I think, than some of the other ones. It is part of a trilogy. It's going to be the HMRC trilogy. And in this world, I've kind of described this a few different ways, but the best way that I can describe this is, in this world, there's something called the HMRC, which is Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and it takes place in like the UK, and actually in the UK, the tax department is called the HMRC. So to like mundane, everyday humans with no magical powers, it just looks like a tax department, and we move on with our lives. But to witches and magical people, they know that this is the governing body. So in this world, witches or women with magical powers are significantly more powerful than men with magical powers, and I think that they are called warlocks. So the coven is the governing body specifically for witches, but I think it does kind of govern the men as well. And so this story really starts with, it follows 4 different women who grew up together. They learned about their magical powers together, and one of these women is the head honcho, the person in charge. I can't remember what the her name, like her title actually is, but she's in charge of the HMRC. And she's got a bunch of oracles working for her, and one of these, actually a lot of these oracles, see that there's going to be a kid that's going to cause this kind of terrible, I don't know, calamitous kind of like situation that is going to kick off like almost the apocalypse, if you will. And so she's convinced, she figured out which kid this is. She calls in one of these other women who used to train kids and is now working as a vet and happy to be working as a vet in a small village. And this woman comes in and discovers there's way more to it than that. She takes this kid under her wing and starts to train them and figures out some stuff. This does deal heavily, I've talked about it before, this deals heavily with trans rights, and it talks about what it means, like in the society that is very binary, there's men and there's women and that's it, and having magical powers and what that means. And so there's a lot of tough conversations in this book between some of our main characters because of this character. It is very present in the story because it is a huge part of what this author is trying to get across, and also a big part of like the plot. But this story, while it does have that very important conversation, the magic system and the world building is absolutely incredible. So There's a lot of layers to this story, but at its root, it's about witches. It's in a world that is very, like, pretty close to our own. It just has this, like, underlayer to it. I really enjoyed it, which is fantastic. It's a trilogy, so you have 2 out right now, and there's definitely going to be a 3rd one that comes out sometime next year. So you've got a lot of things to look forward to with this one. And also, it was just like, it was a fast read. I just kept going, and I felt like I learned so much, and also just like cannot stop talking about how amazing this world is. On a little bit of a lighter note, the next one is another witchy book, and that is The Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This one is just fun. This is like for people who really want a cozy story, if you are into the cozy fantasy vibes, if you want something that's kind of like a rom-com, if you like House of the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and that found family vibe, this is for you. This book is just so much fun. We follow our main character, Mika Moon, who is a witch, and she, along with all of the other witches, they kind of meet up every month or so, every couple months, just to make sure that there's nothing crazy going on. But they're not supposed to meet up, because when witches meet up, it causes people to give them attention, and they're trying to fly under the radar. So, you know, witches aren't supposed to live together. They're not really supposed to be friends with each other. They're supposed to kind of be very solitary creatures. Mika's way of rebelling, let's say, is she has this world's equivalent of a YouTube channel where she puts on, she does witchcraft under the disguise of people like being like, oh, she's not actually doing witchcraft, she's just kind of like playing this character. And then she gets approached by this man who works at this house, and there are 3 young witches at this house, and he's like, please come help us, like, train them. Obviously I don't have magical powers, I don't know how this works, so will you come help out? And so she ends up going and helping out. And so it's just, like I said, very found family. You have these 3 young witches. A couple of them are very sweet. Like, one of them is not so much on the sweet side of things, but you've got that, you've got a gardener, you've got the housekeeper, you've got the cook, and that kind of vibe. And then of course you have the librarian, who is super cantankerous, and there is a relationship, romance of sorts that blooms between her and this librarian. But again, found family protecting these 3 kids. And so it's, like I said, it's very, if you are new to fantasy, this is perfect for you, because it's very loose with its rules, and very I don't know, it's very like light fantasy, in the sense of, this feels like our world. It's just like some of the people in this world have a few things that they can do that are a little bit extra. And so that's the vibe within this one. But I love it. It's so cozy and fun and cute and romancy, and like, seriously, if you're a big romance person, I think you will enjoy this. Another one is for people who, this one is more of the setting as well, but this is a collection of short stories, and that is Beasts and Beauty, and this is by Somen Chainani. This is, like I said, a collection of fairy tales, but they've all been reimagined. There are a bunch of them. So we've got like Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Rapunzel, Cinderella, Rumpelstiltskin, Peter Pan, things like that. And so this author has taken those stories and completely reworked them to be a more inclusive story, to have a different look at these stories, but they are darker. So it does have that, you know, grim fairy tale original darkness vibe to them. Again, a lot of these take place in forests, which gives me those fantasy fall vibes, but this is good for people who like just want to take it in pieces, because like, you just have to read one little section and then you can move on. There are like 12 or 13 stories within this book, so you can break them apart. And also there are like drawings throughout this book. They've got full page illustrations as well. I'm trying to find one. So you've got a bunch of things in here that, here we go, that showcase just these fairy tale children's stories in a new light. So I think the setting of these works really well, but again, because they are kind of grim, if you will, lack of a better word, then it's perfect for kind of the fall spooky season. And the very last book is one that I have read very, very recently, and it's on this list because, again, of like the magic system in a sense, and that is Belladonna by Adeline Grace. I read this one at the beginning of this month and absolutely loved it. So this book follows the main character Signa, who has really bad luck. Each guardian that she has, her parents died when she was really young, and so each guardian that she's had, something bad has happened to them. And so death literally follows her. He is like a person. He's got like a whole personality. He's a whole entity in himself, and Signa cannot die. So she has this ability to get very, very close on the edge of death, and then she can see death and talk to him, or if there's someone who is dying, he'll show up and she can talk to him then. And so she does not like him very much because she just has a very specific look at him. And so the story really gets started. She also can see ghosts. I should mention that as well. And so the story gets started when she gets moved to her most recent kind of a family member, the only one that's still alive really that can be her guardian. She's just trying to make it to, I think it's 19 or 20. What did I say? She was 18 right now. Yeah, no, she's 19. So I think she's trying to make it to 20 because when she's 20, she will inherit her fortune. And that's really the only reason that she's ever had any kind of guardian that has agreed to take care of her. All they want is her money. And so she finally has this guardian who is actually a family. It's the Hawthorne family. And so you've got the head of the house, the main guy, her uncle, who is just throwing these lavish parties. His wife recently passed away, and so he's just completely distraught. You've got him, you have his son, who is kind of trying to hold everything together, and then you have his daughter, who is very, very sickly and seems to be going very similarly to her mother, who just recently passed away. And so the story really starts when she runs into the ghost of this woman who recently passed away, the mom, the wife, the mom of her cousins, I guess her aunt. And so she tells our main character Signa that she was poisoned. And so Signa goes down this rabbit hole with death, trying to figure out what happened to her because she's afraid that the ghost is afraid this is going to happen to her daughter as well. And so Signa goes down the rabbit hole and tries to figure it out. So you've got it's very gothic in its setting. The house that she lives in, at least with her family members, the Hawthorne house, is very gothic. It's very old. And then of course there's a bunch of ghosts that live in it, and so you've got that haunted mansion kind of vibe to it. So you've got that side of things, but then you also have a book about a murder mystery, which is, in my opinion, perfect for the fall. So it's got a couple of layers. It's the setting, it's that death is involved, and it's also a murder mystery. So there's just so many things about this that I really loved, and I think it's perfect for this time of year. I read it at the perfect time. I cannot wait to get the second one because I am definitely investing in the second one. It ends in a way that like the story has an ending and then there's an epilogue which kind of prolongs it into the next story. This will be, I think, a trilogy. So there's 2 out now. Maybe I made that up. Maybe there's going to be 4. No, I think there's only 3. There's 2 out now. There's this one in Foxglove, and then the third one is Wisteria, which is coming out, I believe, sometime next year. There's not a cover of it quite yet, but I really enjoyed my time reading this story. And again, there's just so much about this that gives it that gothic, dark fantasy vibe that I love, and it's perfect for the time of year. And that's it. Those are a look at some of the fantasy books that I think are perfect for this time of year. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, or if you have a fantasy recommendation yourself that you think would be perfect for the fall months. I, of course, would love to know. I'm very much in a fall reading mood right now, especially like a spooky fall reading mood. I have so many things on my list that would fall within that, and so I am just so excited to read all of the things. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them down below. So if you liked this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links. So check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!